Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Eric. I wanted to do a reading update for today. I guess the date is May 3rd, 2026. So, I've been reading some history lately, kind of focused on the early 20th century, the First World War era. And the first book I'll talk about, which I finished, was The Sleepwalkers. This is How Europe Went to War in 1914. The author is Christopher Clark. I think I might have mentioned this in my last video, but this is just a book that attempts to do, it's almost a forensic investigation of how Europe went to war in 1914. The author takes us through the principal countries, um, like Austria-Hungary, Germany, Britain, France, takes us through like how their governments worked, how their foreign policies were shaped, the personalities who shaped them, and kind of how the mechanisms of their governments worked. So some of the book can get really, I guess, focused on systems and how systems worked in the lead up to the war in 1914, and providing an explanation of how it all happened. So it's a bit different approach than the next book I'll talk about, where his focus is less on personalities and more on systems and how systems worked in the lead up to the war, and how they broke down once the war started. So I would say it's a useful book. There's many books, especially around the 100th anniversary of the First World War. I guess that was 10 years ago now, but around that period, like during the 20 teens, I guess you could say, there was a kind of a new crop of books coming out about the First World War and how it got started and how it shaped the 20th century and all that. So this book was really informative, as I said, as far as how governments worked. Maybe it was almost too clinical at times, would be my big criticism of the book. Then the next book I read was a classic, The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman. I'd read her prequel to this book, I guess you could say, The Proud Tower, a few weeks ago. Yeah, but this book is it's a classic. Famously, it was read by JFK, President Kennedy, before and during the Cuban Missile Crisis, as he was very much interested in how the 1914 crisis led to a conflict, and wanted to look at the mistakes that were made then to try to, looking to history for guidance through the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was extremely serious. I did a little bit of research. I wondered how much truth there was to that. Whether was this a myth? Did Kennedy really read this book? Was this really a thing? And apparently, yeah, I did. You can go online, and there's a lot of evidence and proof that Kennedy did read the book, and he talked about the book with people and his advisors. So, and the main lessons he took from the book was, one, to give the other side options, give them some wiggle room so you don't trap the other party in a crisis to where they have no other choice but what to do. And the other big one was not be pushed into rash decisions by your advisors, specifically the military advisors who are itching for war. Because in this book, it's pointed out that as Germany was deciding whether to go to war in 1914, there was a moment where it didn't have to go that far, where they were prepared to go to war with Russia, but not. There was still a possibility they didn't have to go to war with France, but they had this famous von Schlieffen plan, which was the German war plan for a quick victory, and that entailed, and Tuchman goes to great lengths to talk about the von Schlieffen plan, was to invade France, going through Belgium, breaking Belgium neutrality, and quickly knocking out the French army, and then turn east and defeat the Austro-Russian army. So that was the von Schlieffen plan. I guess it was based on quickness. Germany maybe realizing they could not hold out for maybe a long-term war. But anyway, there's an incident in this book where there was a meeting as the crisis was getting out of control, and it was suggested that maybe we don't have to go to war against the West, and maybe this can be contained to a war in the Balkans or in the East. And the generals just quickly push that aside. I know this is all very, very kind of controversial and a lot of finger pointing about how the First World War got started, and I think in the other book, The Sleepwalkers, the author Clark gets into how all the memoirs that and all the government records that came out of the war, and all of them were about justifying their decisions, okay, and kind of covering themselves, so there was a lot of agendas as far as all the memoirs and the government documents that were released. But Tuchman, she's really fascinated with the what if questions of what if they had done this, what if they had done that, and I guess today we call that contingency in history, that you always has options and you can go this way or the other way. But of course, the stakes are so high in 1914 that you almost get the sense that some force was taking over all the countries of Europe, and that just led to the catastrophe of the war. So this book is really good on the lead up to the war, as far as the book famously starts out with the funeral of King Edward. I forget the number, but 1910, the Edwardian era in England was ending, and there was this big funeral for the king, and all the heads of state came centered into London for this. And that's a great passage chapter opening the book with. But the first half of the book really gets into, you have a pageantry of monarchs, and you have diplomats, and we have generals, and the book does a great job of setting all this up and getting into the drama of history of how everything unfolded, which is kind of a contrast to the Sleepwalkers, which is more about systems, and Clark might say that people were under the control of systems, and Tuchman seems to be saying that there's a lot of human agency involved. And I think both approaches have merit. They both have a lot of merit. They're both unique and interesting, but they're very different in their approach. I think the book Guns of August, it gets somewhat less interesting for me in the second half, because it becomes military history. Because once the countries went to war, you had these massive campaigns playing out as Germany invaded west through Belgium into France. Millions of soldiers at arms, massive armies. And I think, like, her approach, like, Tuchman likes to focus on people, right? And I think when you get into the military campaigns, suddenly the book becomes, well, this general ordered this, the army moved here, this general did this, there was a counterattack here, there was an attack here, counterattack here, really brave fighting here, and the narrative just becomes a jumble of almost trying to clarify these very complex campaigns, and it can be a bit flattening and repetitive, for me anyway, as a reader. And I think that's maybe just a limitation of military history, because you have to pack so much detail into it. You just kind of feel like we're in a map room watching a choreography happen of this army did this army did that, and there's drama and everything there, but it becomes abstract in some ways. While Tuchman, she tries to get to the human level here, I just felt like these events were so huge and so complex. It's really difficult and challenging for a writer to present them in a way that's you get the scope of everything. That was my impression of the Guns of August, anyway. But yeah, no doubt, it's strong narrative history, and a rare history book that actually influenced historical figures as well. So there's a big importance there. So yeah, and I guess the next book in the era I've been reading is a memoir, Vera Brittain's Testament of Youth, and I'm about 100 pages or so into this. Vera Brittain, she was a nurse during the First World War. She knew people close to her were killed in the war, and this is her memoir. And the memoir starts out talking about her childhood and her family life. She spends a lot of time writing about her education, and it's also about literature too, and I think that's important, where she gets into a lot her interest in literature, and she was really a aspiring writer from a very early age, and there's also strong feminist themes in the book as well, where she talks about some of the limitations she met as a student pursuing the humanities in the early 20th century. So there's a lot just about English life, English culture. There's really a lot here. So I'm just getting into the war years right now as war is beginning, and how to young people, when the war broke out in 1914, there was the sense that the era preceding it almost became like this idyllic time period where things were carefree, and all of our worries and concerns seemed pretty trivial once war broke out in 1914. And the book does a good job of spelling that out in real time, as the realization set in about what the war would entail. Like, I was just reading how her brother was of age, close of age, and he was wanting to enlist and join the fight. His father was very much against it. So you have this really dramatic family drama happening over the son wanting to go fight the war. Tale as old as time, right? But it's really she does a good job of presenting that. So yeah, this is a really good read. Okay, just a few other things to mention here. Yeah, I picked up a Tom Clancy novel, The Cardinal of the Kremlin, kind of going into the Cold War here. This was published in 1988. And this is kind of what's interesting about this one, there's no movie has been made of this book. Most of the early Clancy books have been adapted. I think I reviewed Hunt for Red October several months ago. Patriot Games I did look at. I didn't really enjoy Patriot Games too much, which is kind of Jack Ryan's origin story, and that there's a plot involving the IRA and terrorism. That book just, I wasn't too fond of this one. This one's a lot better, though. This is sort of a sequel to Hunt for Red October, where we're getting into the late 80s, and so far the book is dealing with laser technology, I guess SDI technology that Russia and America were working on as the Cold War was closing. So yeah, this one's pretty good so far, kind of a late Cold War book, and you do think about, could this one be a movie? And I think this one has possibilities for a film. But anyway, I was reading another one. This is a Stephen King, Full Dark, No Stars. This is one of his collections with 4 novellas in the collections. I think this was 2010. Yeah, I read the first one, 1922, which was fine. So yeah, don't have a whole lot to say about these. I know a movie was made into 1922. The story, which is about a murder and the guilt that follows it, so that seems to be a theme to these stories. But I've not seen the film. But anyway, that's Full Dark, No Stars. One last one I mentioned. This was just to pick up. This is Alien Nation. I think I had watched the movie, the 1980s movie, and and I thought, oh, it'll be an interesting world to explore a little bit more. And I guess this book is a prequel to the 1988 film. I don't know if I'll be reading this anytime soon, but I thought, oh, okay, might be an interesting world to stay in for a little bit more. So yeah, those are my books I've been reading over the past couple weeks. You have any comments about these or any connections to what you've been reading lately? Feel free to comment. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye.